Junie Alcott had sold her guitar, her mother's turquoise ring, and the good winter coat off her own back, and she still had only $211 folded flat in her boot. And then the letter came from the group home telling her she had aged out on her birthday and the bed was needed by the 1st of the month. The office smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. Outside, in the gravel lot, a bus she could not afford idled with the door open in a stranger's hands. Nobody had left her anything. Nobody ever had. So she took the $211 and she bought the one thing in the county that cost less than a tank of gas. A dead roadside filling station off Route 9 with a hand-lettered sign that read $10 or best offer. When she finally pried up the loose floorboard behind the counter, she found something a man she had never met had spent 40 years quietly building. She had kept books for the home in secret in a spiral notebook since she was 13. She could still balance a column in the dark. For a long moment she just stood there in the empty office and breathed. The last of what she owned fit in an army surplus duffel and the pockets of her jeans. She was 18 years old. She had not cried when the caseworker signed the discharge papers, and she did not cry now. She looked once at the bright, clean square of tile where the mini-fridge had stood behind the counselor's desk, the one square the years of scuffing had not dulled, and she thought that a childhood in the system was a lot like that, a clean, bright rectangle of nothing, marking the shape of a thing that was supposed to have been there and never was. The bill of sale was folded in her back pocket. She had read it 4 times. The way you read a thing you cannot quite believe belongs to you. Alcott. Junie R. Purchaser, 1 parcel, former filling station and roadside store, Route 9, Pocahontas County, West Virginia. Consideration, $10. The old man at the county clerk's window had squinted at her over his glasses when she counted the 10 singles out onto the counter, and he had asked her twice if she understood there was no water, no working power, and a back tax lien older than she was. She had said she understood. She had understood better than he knew. It was the first thing in her whole life that was going to be hers, and hers alone, and it cost less than the bus ticket out of the county she was not going to buy after all. She walked the 2 miles out to it from town, with the duffel biting into her shoulder, and the October wind cutting through the flannel that was all she had left after she sold the coat. Autumn had already come to the high country. The maples along Route 9 had gone to rust and the hemlocks stood black-green behind them, and the road ran flat and cracked past a shuttered feed store and a church with 1 bell, out to the low cinder-block building on its gravel apron where 2 dead pumps stood under a sagging canopy like a pair of old men who had forgotten what they were waiting for. She had passed it 100 times on the group home van, her face against the glass, and she had thought every single time, without knowing why, that someone had loved that place once and then stopped. She had kept books since she was 13. That was the thing she kept coming back to on the long walk, the way your tongue keeps finding a chipped tooth. There had been a house parent named Miss Rennick, in the second home, the good one, before it closed, and Miss Rennick had run the grocery money out of a coffee can and could never make it stretch, and Junie had started keeping the numbers for her in a spiral notebook, quietly, so the little ones would still get milk on Thursdays. She had a gift for it the way some children have a gift for a piano nobody taught them to play. She could look at a month of receipts and see the truth of it, the small thefts, the waste, the one place $1 could be bent to cover 2. She had kept the books for 4 different homes since, always in secret, always in a notebook she carried in the duffel, because a kid who could count was a kid who noticed things, and noticing things was not safe in a place where the adults were counting too. The station came up on her the way it always had from the van, all at once after the long flat straight. Cinderblock gone the gray of an old dish rag. A flat roof with a lip of rust, 2 glass-topped pumps, the glass gone milky, the brand long scoured off, a canopy with 1 bent post, and a plate glass front window, cracked corner to corner and taped with yellowed tape, and behind it, on the counter, catching the last of the light, there was a lamp, a plain kerosene lamp, brass base gone soft with tarnish, glass chimney clouded with years of dust. It was not lit. Of course it was not lit. No one had run this place in years. But it sat exactly in the center of the counter, angled a quarter turn so its light, when it had a light, would throw out through the front window toward the road. She stood in the gravel, with her duffel at her feet, and looked at that dead lamp through the cracked glass, and something moved in her chest that she had no name for, and did not trust. The door was not locked. That was the first strange thing. A dead building on a dead road with a $10 price on it, and the door was not locked. It stuck at the frame and then gave, and it swung in on the smell of cold dust and motor oil and old paper, and Junie Alcott stepped into the first 4 walls that had ever been hers and made herself look at them. It was one long room. A counter with a dead register. A wall of empty shelves. A back room with a cot and a wood stove and a slop sink. A calendar on the wall, 13 years out of date, turned to a month of a year she'd been 5 years old for. And everywhere, on every flat surface, there were the coffee cans, Folgers cans, red gone to rust brown, a dozen of them, lined on the shelves like they were the stock the store had left to sell. She lifted one, and it was empty. She lifted another, and it rattled with washers and screws. She did not understand them yet. She would. She walked the long room slowly, touching things. Because you cannot help it in a place that has been left, your hands go out ahead of you into other people's endings. Behind the counter there was a stool worn shiny by one man sitting. There was a peg by the door, with a canvas coat still hanging on it, shaped to the ghost of a pair of shoulders. And she stood a moment looking at the shape of a man she had never met. There was a shelf of cloth-bound books she took at first for old auto manuals, inventory, receipts, the flat daily business of a man who had pumped gas on a forgotten road for a living. And propped against the register there was a photograph, curled at the edges. A lean man in that same canvas coat, not smiling. Standing under the canopy with his hand on the shoulder of a boy of maybe 10, and on the back in a square, careful hand, one line, "The station keeps whoever the road forgets." She did not know the man in the photograph. She did not know his name. She had bought his life for $10 from a county that had given up on collecting his taxes. And she stood in the cold with his coat on the peg and his handwriting in her hand, and she felt, absurdly, like she had walked into a house where a party had ended just before she arrived, where the plates were still warm and everyone had only just gone. She would deal with all of it in the morning. Tonight she only wanted to be out of the wind and to sleep and to not think. She found split wood stacked dry by the back room stove, stacked by a man who had known he would want it, and she built a small fire with hands that had gotten good at small fires, and she sat on the shiny stool with the duffel between her feet and watched the flames catch through the stove door, and for the first time in longer than she could count. The thing that was always clenched at the center of her began, a little, to unclench. That was when she noticed the board. The floor behind the counter was wide old plank, dark with decades of a man's boots turning in the same 6 feet of space. And in the spot where a man would stand 10,000 evenings to work a register, one board sat a quarter-inch proud of the others. She had knelt to feed the stove and her knee had rocked on it, that small betraying give of a thing not nailed down. She looked at it a while. She told herself it was nothing, a warped board, a swollen nail. But the whole rest of the floor was nailed flat and true by a careful man, and a careful man does not leave one board loose in the exact spot he stands the most. She found a flat pry bar in the tool drawer under the register, where it had lived, from the wear on its handle, a very long time. She fit it into the seam. She breathed once, the way you do before you lift a thing you are afraid of. And she pried the board up. Under it, in the dry dark between the joists, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string, there were more of the cloth-bound books, not inventory. She could see that at once from the first one she lifted out and untied and opened by the firelight, because the pages were not columns of gallons and prices. They were names. Names and dates and dollar amounts and beside each one a single line in that same square, careful hand. Roy Setzer. February ran dry at 2 a.m. with a sick baby in the truck. Filled him. Told him to forget it. $0. Marta Hines. Every Tuesday. Coffee and a full tank. Won't take the tank for free, so I short the pump and don't tell her. A girl, no last name. Left on the road by whoever she'd trusted. Fed her. Never once made her say thank you. Junie turned the pages and her hands began to shake, but for a different reason than the cold now. There were dozens of names. Hundreds, 40 years of them, one road's worth of quiet disasters, and the one man who had left his light on for every single one. A trucker broke down in a January storm. A family who couldn't make the gas to the funeral 3 counties over. A boy who had run away from something worse than running away and slept the winter on the backroom cot and was never asked where from. Beside each name a dollar figure, and most of the figures were zeros, and the zeros were the ones that undid her, because a zero meant he had given it and written down that he had given it and written down that no one was to know. She read until the fire burned low and she had to feed it again. She kept a hand flat on the pages as she read, the way you hold a hand over a wound, and the names went by her one at a time, each one a night a stranger had turned his sign around from closed and driven out into somebody's worst hour with a can of gas and a thermos. A December entry, whole family off the road in the ice. No coats. Ran them the heater and gave them the coats off the peg and my own. There was a page for a bad flu winter. A column of the sick, and beside them what he had carried out their roads, gas so the doctor could come, gas so a man could get to the hospital in the valley, gas he never charged and never mentioned. There were entries that were only a date and a name and the word stayed, and she came to understand that stayed meant this man had sat all night on the shiny stool with somebody so they would not be alone with something, and had written down only that he stayed, and nothing of what it cost him. If you've made it this far into Junie's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He had done all of it. This man, whose name she still did not know, on a road the state had rerouted around 30 years before, in a station the county valued at nothing, out of coffee cans full of a poor man's small money. She read the whole first ledger and half the second, and somewhere in the second one the names began to repeat. The same people coming back year after year, and she came to understand that she was not reading a list of charity. She was reading a map of a whole community that this one man had quietly held together from behind a dead register on a forgotten road. A quiet economy of debts that nobody ever collected and everybody remembered. At the bottom of the cavity, under the last of the ledgers, there was one more coffee can, older than the ones on the shelves, the paper worn to nothing. She lifted it out, and it was heavy in a way a can of coffee is not heavy. She pried the lid. It was full of money. Folded bills, banded in 10s and 20s, soft with a lifetime of handling. And tucked down the side a blue passbook from the Pocahontas County Farmers Bank, and when she opened it the last stamped line read, balance, $41,209. $41,209. A man who had died with a truck worth nothing and a coat on a peg. A man whose whole estate the county had auctioned to an 18-year-old for $10. Had put away, a little at a time, across 40 years, $41,209. And he had not spent it on himself. It was still here. It was waiting. She did the arithmetic without meaning to, because that was how her mind had always worked, since the spiral notebook, since Miss Rennick's coffee can. The station the county called $10. The account beneath it, 41,000 and change, more than 4,000 times what she had paid for the deed. The math of it was staggering, sitting there in the firelight with the numbers stacking themselves up neat in her head. But the math was not the point, and she knew it even as she counted. The point was the last stamped line in the soft folded bills and the fact that a man had gone without, quietly, for 40 years, So the going without would be there in a coffee can for whoever came down the road next with nothing. He had not been saving money. He had been saving a door open. And folded inside the passbook, in an envelope gone soft as cloth, there was a letter. It did not have her name on it. Of course it did not. He had never met her, had never known an orphan named Junie Alcott would count out 10 singles at the clerk's window 5 years after he died. The envelope said only, in that square hand, for whoever finds this. And she sat back on her heels on the cold floor by the open grave in the boards, and she held the letter she could not yet open, and she looked up at the dead lamp on the counter, and she understood, all at once, that she had spent 18 years being handed off from one place that did not want her to the next, and that she had just bought, for $10, the one place in the world that had been built by a man who spent his whole life making sure that nobody ever got left on the side of a road the way she had been left, over and over, her entire life. She slept that night on the backroom cot with the letter unopened on her chest and the ledgers stacked around her like a wall. In the morning there was a truck on the gravel apron that had not been there in the dark. A big new half-ton dealer plate still in the window, mud-free tires, and leaning against it with a phone in his hand was a man in a soft gray blazer and a good haircut, boots that had never seen a working morning in their life. He looked up as she came out the front door, and he smiled the way a man smiles at a closing, the way a man smiles when he thinks he has already won and only wants you to sign. "You'd be the buyer," he said. "The county clerk told me a young girl bought the Halloran place. I didn't believe him. It's got a name?" she said. "The place?" The man tilted his head, and something behind his easy smile recalculated, the way a register recalculates. "Walt Halloran," he said. "Ran it 40 years. Died 5 years back now. You didn't know whose place you bought?" He laughed, not unkindly, which was worse than unkindly. "I'm Dale Coyle. I'm in development, over in the valley, and I have got to tell you, sweetheart, you have accidentally done me a very large favor." Dale Coyle told it to her plainly, because men like Dale Coyle tell you the price plainly once they are sure they hold the cards. The state was finally putting the interchange back in. The new Route 9 bypass, a full diamond interchange, right here where the old road crossed, and this dead station, worthless as a building, sat on the corner parcel that the whole interchange assembly needed, and he had spent 2 years trying to run down who owned it through the back tax tangle, and now here it was, bought clean for $10 by a girl who plainly did not know what she was standing on. He said it all gently. He said it the way you show a child a card trick. "I'm not here to cheat you," he said, spreading his hands, warm and reasonable. "I'm here to help you out of something you can't possibly manage. You've got no water, no power, a lien older than you are, and 100 ways for a girl alone out here for the winter to freeze or worse. Sign it back over to me, I'll clear the lien, I'll square the county, and I'll put real money in your pocket. $10,000, honey, for a place you paid 10 for. That's the best day you've ever had, and we both know it." Junie stood in the door of the first thing she had ever owned, and behind her in the long room were the ledgers, and the coffee can, and the passbook, and the letter she had not yet opened. And she looked at this man in his clean boots in the gravel that Walt Halloran had raked, and she was surprised to find that she was not afraid of him. She had been afraid of a great many adults in her life, adults with clipboards and adults with keys, and she knew exactly what their fear tasted like, and this was not it. This man wanted something from her. That was different. That she could work with. "I'll think about it," she said. That was not what Dale Coyle expected. He had expected a scared kid to grab $10,000 with both hands and run. His smile stayed, but something behind it went flat. "Don't think too long," he said. "The state doesn't wait on paperwork, and a lien like yours has a clock on it. And a girl your age, alone, no money, out here, that's a lot of things that can go wrong before spring." He left his card on the cracked front counter, right beside the dead lamp, as if she might sign it there in the cold. He backed the big truck down the gravel and was gone up Route 9, and Junie stood in the empty station a long time and thought about the word he'd used. Manage. You can't manage this. She had been managing since she was 13 years old. She had managed 4 households' grocery money out of coffee cans while grown adults skimmed the top. She thought she could probably manage a building. She went back in and she opened the letter. She read it standing at the counter with the gray morning coming up behind the cracked glass, and she read it 3 times before the words would hold still. And then she sat down on the shiny stool and pressed the soft envelope to her mouth and stayed that way a while as the fire settled in the back and the wind worked the loose canopy post outside. The letter had answered a question she had carried so long she had stopped feeling its weight, whether the door being open had ever been meant to include her, specifically her. A girl the man had never met and never could have known. It had. For whoever finds this, he had written, and she was whoever, she was exactly whoever, she was the whoever the whole thing had been left for. She had spent 18 years believing herself the kind of person doors were locked against, and a dead stranger had reached forward through 5 years of dark and left one unlocked. On purpose. For no one but her, before she ever existed to him at all. The developer's man came 2 days later, sent a head of coil to soften her. She understood later. Bright quilted vest, boots with the shine still on them, a smile like a screen door that would not quite latch. His name was Prentice, and he walked the parcel like he already owned it, pacing off the corner where the on-ramp would land. He stood in the long room and looked at the dead register and the empty shelves and the coffee cans and the peg with the coat on it, and he said, "Well, it's got character," in the voice of a man who meant it had nothing. He offered her $9,000. He said it the way you drop a coin in a cup, generous and a little bored. When she did not take it, he told her that of course she should think about her situation, a girl alone, no income, the taxes coming due, the lien with its clock, the fire code that a structure like this surely did not meet, the county that might just decide a condemned building on a state right-of-way was a public danger. He smiled through all of it. He was, she understood, telling her exactly how it would go if she made him unhappy, and telling her with a smile so that afterward no one could say he had threatened a child. "You seem like a smart girl," Prentice said, and it was the most dangerous thing he had said yet, because in his mouth smart meant biddable, meant a girl who would take a number and go. She had been called a smart girl her whole life by people who meant she should be quiet and grateful and gone. She stood behind the counter and let him talk. She had learned in 4 different group homes that a person will tell you the whole shape of what they want if you simply decline to fill the silence for them. Prentice could not stand the silence. He kept adding to his offer without her having said a word, kept sweetening it, kept naming problems he could make disappear. And every problem he named was a problem he was promising to make if she said no. She watched him do it, and she thought, with a bookkeeper's cold clarity, that she was watching a man show her his whole ledger without knowing she could read. $45,000, he said finally, at the door, as though the number cost him blood. That is the ceiling. That is more than 4,000 times what you paid, from a company that does not have to give you a dime. You'd be a fool to walk away from that, and you don't strike me as a fool. He was right that she was not a fool, and wrong about everything he thought that meant. He had told her one true thing without meaning to. If a development company would pay $45,000 for this corner, then this corner was worth a great deal more than $45,000. Because men like Prentice did not lead with their ceiling, and men like Dale Coyle did not spend 2 years chasing a $10 parcel through the tax rolls for a corner worth $45. She had kept the books for a grocery run out of a coffee can. She knew the difference between what a thing costs and what it is worth to the person who has to have it, and she knew that the number a man says out loud when he wants your signature is the floor of a room whose ceiling he is standing on. She told Prentice she would think about it. He left his card next to Coil's on the counter, and now there were two, and the dead lamp sat between them. That night she did what Walt Halloran had done 10,000 nights, and she had never once done in her life for a place of her own. She cleared the counter, and she cleaned the lamp, wiped the chimney with the hem of her flannel, trimmed the crusted wick, found a can of kerosene in the back that still had weight to it, and she touched a match to it and set it back on the counter in the window that faced the road. And by its warm yellow light and the firelight from the back, she opened the ledgers and she went to work. It came back to her the way a language comes back, all at once, in the hands before the head. She squared the ledger's spines and set out the coffee can cash in banded stacks, and she began to reconcile. And the years of it, the spiral notebook years, the secret years, came up out of her and opened. She was fast. She was faster at 18 than most people ever get, because she had learned it in the dark and afraid, and fear teaches you to be exact. She matched every deposit in the passbook to a line in the ledgers. She traced the withdrawals, the small even ones each month, the larger ones that came whenever a name appeared with a real dollar figure beside it. She built, in a night, a complete accounting of a dead stranger's secret 40 years. And when she was done, she sat back and looked at the columns she had made and understood she had just done, for a man she would never meet. The one service no one else in the county could have done, she had proven, to the penny, that the poorest man on Route 9 had spent 40 years quietly being the richest, and had balanced every account but his own. And folded in the back of the last ledger, twice over, with the county seal on it, there was a document, and when she read it her hands went still. It was a deed restriction, recorded and filed and notarized 26 years ago at the Pocahontas County Courthouse. Walt Halloran had placed the station parcel, the corner, the whole worthless kingdom of it, into a permanent charitable trust with a single, plain, irrevocable condition that the property was to be kept, in perpetuity, as a place of refuge and free assistance for travelers in need on the road, and could never be sold, developed, or converted to any private use for as long as the law of West Virginia stood. It could not be bought. It could not be closed. A developer could hold the deed 100 times over and own nothing but the obligation to keep the light on. He had done it 26 years ago, before the state ever dreamed of putting the interchange back, before Dale Coyle was old enough to knot a tie. She sat with that a long time, the lamp steady on the counter, and then she laughed, a small startled sound in the long empty room, because she understood at last that this man she had never met, who had run a dead station on a forgotten road, had reached forward 26 years through the dark and, quietly, without a word to anyone, taken the whole thing off the table before the men who counted everything ever got to the table at all. But she did not know the law well enough to be sure, and she did not have $100 for a lawyer, and she was 18 and a stranger in a county that had only ever driven past her. So in the morning she walked back down Route 9 into town, to the one street with a hardware store and a feed store and a diner, and she asked the man behind the hardware counter, an old man, careful hands, a pilot light burning steady in the little heater at his feet, whether there was anyone in the county who could read a legal paper for a person who couldn't pay. The old man looked at her a long moment, at the flannel and the duffel and the eyes that watched the door. "You bought Walt's station," he said. "It was not a question. Whole town's talking. Girl paid $10 for the Halloran place." He set down what he was holding. "I'm Roy Setzer," he said. "Walt filled my tank at 2 a.m. once, with a sick baby in my truck and no money in my pocket, and told me to forget it, and I have never once forgot it. There's a name I'll give you. Bet Aldridge. Retired lawyer, out on the Falls Road. You tell her you bought Walt's place, and you found his books. She'll not charge you a dime, and don't you dare insult her by offering." Bet Aldridge was 71 years old, a retired county lawyer with reading glasses on a chain and a leather case worn soft at the corners, and she read the trust document standing in her kitchen, and then she took her glasses off and pressed them to her lips a moment before she spoke. "I drew this," she said. "I drew this for Walt Halloran 6 years ago. He came into my office with cash and a coffee can, and he said, 'Bet, I want to fix it so nobody can ever undo it. Not my kin, not the county, not some man in a truck who wants the corner.' And we fixed it." She looked at Junie over the top of the glasses. "He didn't owe me the fee. I owed him. My husband ran off the mountain drunk one winter night, and it was Walt found the car, and Walt sat with him till he sobered, and Walt never told a soul, not even me, till years after. So no. This corner cannot be developed. Not by any company, not by any man. It's done. It was done before you were born, child." Bet made coffee and sat her down at the kitchen table and walked her through it, line by line, in the plain, patient way of a woman who had spent 40 years turning the law into English for frightened people. The restriction ran with the land, she explained. It did not belong to Junie. It belonged to the corner itself, in perpetuity, held by a small mountain land trust that still existed and still met twice a year in a church basement. No sale could break it. No lien could swallow it. The trust had a standing provision to satisfy back taxes from its own small endowment, which was why the county had let it slide for years rather than untangle it, and which was why they had quietly sold the shell of it to the first person foolish or brave enough to want it. A developer could buy the deed 1,000 times and own nothing but the right to stand on a corner and keep a station open that he was legally bound never to close. Walt didn't just refuse to sell, Bet said, and there was something like awe in her voice, the professional admiring a clean piece of work. He made refusing permanent. He took the temptation away from every soul who'd come after him, including you, honey. He knew people are weak in a hard winter, and a corner like that is a lot of money. So he made it so the light couldn't be put out even by somebody who was starving and standing right on top of it. She set down her cup. "I have practiced law in this county since 1979. That is the single most loving legal document I have ever drawn, and he wrote most of it himself, on a legal pad, in that square hand, and made me clean it up." Junie walked back up Route 9 in the long afternoon light, and the frost had burned off, and the maples were gold and rust along the flat straight, and she found she was not thinking about the money. She was thinking about the lamp, and about a man who had spent 40 years making sure a corner of a forgotten road would keep taking in the people the world drove past, and about how she, who had been exactly one of those people her whole life, had walked into the middle of it with $10 and no idea what she was standing on. There was a boy on the canopy apron when she got back. He was 18, maybe 19, lean, in a canvas coat a size too big and a knit cap, wood dust on his boots, a battered pack at his feet. He watched the road like a person watches an exit they might need. He did not come toward her. He said, from under the dead canopy, in a voice that had practiced not asking for anything, "This is Walt's station." And then, quieter, he told me if I ever had nowhere, I could come here. He said the door wasn't locked. He swallowed. "I didn't know he'd passed. I've been walking 3 days. I can go." "What's your name?" Junie said. Theo, she knew the name. She had read it 2 nights ago by lamplight, on a page near the end of the last ledger in Walt's square hand. Theo, aging out in the spring, same as they all do. Garbage bag and a bus token. Slept the back room a winter. Won't take help if you offer it, so don't offer it. Just leave the light on. She stood in the gravel that a dead man had raked, and she looked at this boy who had walked 3 days to a stranger's station because a stranger had once told him the door wasn't locked. And she understood that she was standing exactly where Walt Halloran had stood 100 times, and that there was only one thing to say, and that saying it was going to be the thing that saved her own life as much as his. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "There's stew on the stove, and it's too much for one. Bring your pack in out of the cold." He ate 3 bowls of stew and tried not to let her see how hungry he was, and she pretended not to see, and that pretending was its own small mercy she had learned the exact shape of from years on the other side of it. He told her a little, in pieces, the way a person tells you things when they have decided to trust you, but have not decided to admit it. He had been in the county's care since he was small, same as her. He had aged out in the spring with a garbage bag and a bus token, same as her. He had met Walt 3 winters back, when Walt had found him sleeping in the church vestibule and had not called anyone. Had only come back the next night with a sleeping bag and a thermos, and sat with him a while and told him about a station at the crossroads where the door was never locked. "He never made me say thank you," Theo said, and his voice did a thing then that he clearly hated. "Everybody always makes you say thank you." He never did, not once. He looked at the fire through the stove door. "I didn't come to take anything," he said. "I just didn't have anywhere the light was on." "I know," Junie said. "Me either. I bought this place last week because it was the only door I could afford, and it turns out the man who built it already left it open for both of us." She looked at the boy across the firelight, 2 orphans in a dead stranger's station on a road the state forgot, and she thought that Walt Halloran, wherever he was, would have said the room was doing exactly what it was built to do. She gave him the back room and the cot, and she took a bedroll by the stove, and she made him take the wool blankets. And she lit a candle against the cold and told him good night, and he said it back like a word in a language he was just learning. He slept through the night. In the morning she found him already up, splitting the woodpile down without being asked, his breath white in the frost, and he had swept the apron under the dead canopy. He had swept it the way, she imagined, the man in the photograph had swept it, and she stood in the door and watched him and had to hold the frame. The word went out along Route 9 the way word does in a county where everyone owes everyone something. Marta Hines came first, the church cleaner, with a casserole and a question. "Have you eaten?" and did not wait for the answer before she was inside stacking wood by the stove. Marta had a way of moving through a room that asked no permission, and she talked the whole time, low and easy, about nothing. About the weather and the price of heating oil and whose grandbaby had come, and Junie understood the talk was a kindness too, a way of filling a cold room with the ordinary sound of a life so a grieving person would not have to. "Walt kept my tank full a whole year I couldn't have paid a dime," Marta said, not looking up from the stove. "Shorted his own pump so I wouldn't feel it. 'Leave the light, Junie,' he'd have said. So I'll say it to you. 'Leave the light on out here, honey. That's all the thanks anybody wants.' Pruitt came from the feed store with a truck bed of split oak and would not take a cent. Walt got me my seed on credit in a bad year and never charged the interest," he said. "Paid it forward 11 times since. I keep count. This is 12. He stacked the whole cord himself against the north wall while Theo worked beside him, the 2 of them not talking much. The older man showing the younger how you cross the ends so a stack stands through a wind. Hollis, the slow deputy, came and stood in the gravel and did not say much, and set a new post under the bent canopy because it needed setting, and he had brought the lumber. He measured twice and cut once and set it plumb, and when Junie thanked him he went red to the ears and said, "Walt pulled my daddy out of a ditch in the ice the year I was born. Whole family'd have been on the road otherwise." He looked at the post. "It's a good post," he said, which was as close as Hollis came to saying anything about his own heart. Roy Setzer drove out at dusk to see, with his own eyes, the lamp lit in the window again from up close, and when he saw it through the cracked glass he took off his cap and stood in the road a while, and then he got back in his truck and drove home without a word, and Junie understood that some thank yous are too big for the mouth. They came the way the ledgers said they had always come. And she began, without deciding to write them down. A new cloth-bound book from the shelf, the first blank one Walt had never gotten to. Names and dates, and beside each one a single line in a hand that was learning to be square and careful. She was keeping the ledger. She had not planned to keep the ledger. It had simply been set down in front of her, the way the whole station had, and she had picked it up. because a girl who had kept books in secret her whole life did not know how to be handed a set of them and not keep them true. Dale Coyle came back the second week, alone this time, and she saw the change in him before he was out of the truck. He had made his calls. He had learned about the trust. He stood in the gravel where Walt Halloran had raked, and he had, for once, nothing to sell. "You knew," he said. "When I offered you $10,000, you already knew it couldn't be touched." "I found out after," she said. "But I'd have said no either way, Mr. Coyle." He looked at the station, and the woodpile Theo had split and the new plumb post under the canopy, and the smoke going up straight in the still cold air, and the lamp burning yellow behind the cracked glass in the middle of the afternoon because she had stopped putting it out. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before, something that might, in a better man, have grown into shame. He was displaced, not undone. He would drive back to the valley and tell the story so that he came out of it fine, but for one moment, on the gravel, he was quiet. "You're 18 years old," Coyle said finally. "You could take the money and go anywhere. Start over clean. Why in God's name would you want to freeze out here all winter, keeping a dead man's gas station for a bunch of people who never did a thing for you?" "That's just it," Junie said. "He never did a thing for them either before they were strangers." He kept the light on until they weren't. She looked at him levelly, this grown man in his clean boots, asking a real question for once. "Nobody ever kept a light on for me, Mr. Coyle. Not once, my whole life. Until a dead man I never met left one burning in a window I could afford. I'm not selling that. There's not enough money in your valley." Coyle did not have anything to say to that. He looked at the ground a while. Before he pulled out, he set an envelope on the counter beside his card, unmarked and did not explain it, and drove down Route 9 and was gone. Inside the envelope, later, she found a check. It was not an apology, because Dale Coyle did not have the words for one and never would. It was just a number written in his hand, and it was more than $10,000, and she understood it for what it was. The closest a man who counted everything could come to admitting he had almost bought and closed the one thing on that road that mattered, and called it a favor. She did not cash it for a long time. When she finally did, she folded it into the coffee can, for the next one down the road. Prentice from the development company made 2 more calls, and then stopped calling. His truck backed down the gravel one last gray morning and never came up it again. The corner was safe. It had been safe for 26 years. It would be safe as long as the law held, which Walt Halloran had judged correctly, to be longer than the patience of any man in a quilted vest. The letter, the one she had opened alone the second morning, she kept folded in the front of the new ledger, and she read it on the hard nights. It was not long. Walt had not been a man of many words on paper any more than off it. "To whoever finds this," it said, "if you found the boards up, you were looking, and if you were looking, you needed something, and that means the station is doing its job, and I am glad. The corner can't be sold, I saw to that, so don't let anybody talk you into being sorry about it. The money in the can is for the next one who comes down the road with nothing. You'll know them. Feed them first, ask them nothing. The door's not locked. It never was. Whatever brought you here, whoever left you, they were wrong about you, and I'd have told you so myself if I'd lived to meet you. Keep the light in the window. You don't light it for the night somebody comes. You light it for all the nights they don't." Walt Halloran. There was a night in December that tested all of it. A storm came up the valley faster than the radio had promised, wet snow turning to ice, and near midnight there were headlights swinging wild on the flat straight, and then still at an angle in the ditch across the road. Junie was already pulling Walt's canvas coat off the peg before she had finished deciding to. Theo had the gas can and the jumper cables out of the back. They crossed the iced road together, slow, the lamp burning behind them in the window, and in the ditched car they found a young woman and a baby, run off the road in the middle of the night with a split lip and $30, driving nowhere driving away, the way Junie herself had walked out of the group home not 2 months before. They brought her into the station. Junie fed her first and asked her nothing, exactly as the letter said. She put the baby to sleep in the warm by the stove, and she sat with the young woman until dawn while the ice ticked against the cracked glass, and she did not leave her alone with it. In the morning she wrote it in the ledger. A name, a date, and the single word Walt had used, that she understood now from the inside, stayed. When the woman tried to thank her, Junie heard her own mouth say the words before she had planned them. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just leave a light on wherever you land. That's the whole of it." And she gave her $300 out of the coffee can, folded small, pressed into her hand at the door, and would not hear a word about paying it back, because that was not how the account was kept. Winter came in hard over the Alleghenies after that, and the station held. Theo learned the wood stove and the slop sink line that froze at the second cold snap, and the way the road iced worst at the crossroads. He stopped watching the door like an exit and started watching it like a thing that might bring someone he was glad to see. He asked her one evening, not looking up from the wood he was whittling, whether she thought Walt would have minded that Theo had come and stayed, and Junie set down her pen and told him the truth, which was that Walt had left the door unlocked for exactly one reason, and it was sitting in front of her, holding a knife and a piece of cedar, and the boy had to go outside for a minute after that, and neither of them ever spoke of it again, which was how it was done. Bet Aldridge drove out on Sundays with legal pads and taught Junie how the trust worked, how to draw from the small endowment to keep the taxes clear and the roof sound, how to keep the ledger's work going after them both. Marta and Pruitt and Roy and Hollis came and went, and the found family that a dead man had quietly built out of one roads rescued and broken closed around his 18-year-old stranger without anyone ever saying a word about it, because saying it was not how these things were done. She kept the books. She was, it turned out, very good at the one thing that 4 households of grown adults had thought was just a quiet child's odd little habit. She reconciled the past 40 years, and she opened the ledger on the next 40, and every evening, no matter the weather, no matter how tired, she cleaned the chimney and trimmed the wick and lit the kerosene lamp and set it in the window that faced the road. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been on the walk out from town, the one who had $211 in her boot and a duffel and no idea in the world where she would sleep past the first of the month. That girl had spent 18 years being moved along, handed off, made to say thank you, taught in 100 small corrections to see herself the way the system saw her. A case, a bed to be needed by somebody else, a thing worth less than a bus ticket out. And a dead man she never met had spent 40 years proving that the county's dollar assessments were lies and had left, under a loose board, the one thing that could tell a thrown-away girl the truth about her own worth, that she was exactly the whoever the whole thing had been built for, and that keeping a light for other people is the only thing she ever found that also, quietly, keeps you. She wrote to the group home that spring, to Miss Rennick, who was old now and in a home of her own, and told her there was a place on Route 9 with a stew pot always on and a light in the window and a bed for anybody the road forgot, and that Junie kept the books there now, out in the open, in ink, the way she'd always wanted to. Miss Rennick wrote back by summer. It was a start. Walt, she thought, would have said a start was plenty. A start was a lamp, you did not need the whole sun. On the last evening of that first autumn, before the deep snows, Junie Alcott stood on the swept apron under the canopy at dusk, with the letter in her coat pocket and the new ledger under her arm, and she watched the light go out of the sky over the ridge. She was 18 years old. Behind her the wood stove ticked, and Theo laid the counter for 3, because Bet was staying to supper. Down the flat straight, in the window of Roy Setzer's place, a light burned steady, and out here her own lamp burned in the window to answer it, 2 small yellow points strung across the black face of the mountain like a sentence that had finally found its period. She thought of Marta's casserole and Pruitt's oak and Hollis's plum new post and Bet's soft leather case and Theo's swept boards, and she thought that a man could be assessed at $10 and be the richest man the road ever held. And no developer, no company, no man with a good haircut had ever once been able to see it. She went in and blew across her cold hands and did not blow out the lamp. She never would again. A lamp isn't lit for the night someone comes. It's lit for all the nights they don't, so that it will already be burning on the one night they do.